Hello everybody and welcome back to 3D Printing 101. Today we're going to be talking about one of the most important things, 3D printer maintenance. Now, it's one thing to get this printer going. It's great to get this started. But once we do that, we have to figure out how to maintain that over the long term. There are tons of things that we got to do to make sure that this keeps running well. You don't just get your first print and you're like, oh, that's awesome. Now what? My printer doesn't work. So without further ado, let's get right into it. So first things first, some tools that you probably already have, or at least you have most of them, that are going to be extremely helpful for this. Number one is flush cutters. These have a bunch of different purposes for 3D printing, but you should really have them. Isopropyl alcohol. This is really helpful for cleaning lots of stuff whenever you're cleaning the build plate, and just in general. It works very well, and it's super cheap. You can get a bottle this size at the dollar store for $1. A microfiber cloth. Microfiber cloth has some advantages over paper towels, but if that's all you have access to, that's okay too. A scraper, and then really just whatever tools came with your printer. There are other things, and we'll talk about them in this video. But yeah, make sure you have the correct wrenches to adjust your printer. If you don't have those, you can buy them at Lowe's or Harbor Freight or whatever place is local to you. And usually you can get them for a pretty good price. $20, you can buy every tool you need. So number one, 3D printer maintenance. This is the most basic thing. Anybody can do it. Is clean the bed regularly. Now you don't have to do this after every single print. Between most prints, I like to give it just a little bit of a wipe. Part of that's just to get the oils from my hands off of it, because if I've been touching the build plate a lot, then my hands are gonna leave oils on it, and those can sort of mess with adhesion and some other problems. But cleaning it every once in a while, whenever it's dirty, if you're using any kinds of adhesives, which we'll get into later, then that's gonna definitely cause some problems. But yeah, just using some alcohol, one of these, and even if you don't have one of those, you can use one of these. There is a really great method that I like to use whenever my print bed is super filthy, and when it's just beyond just giving a little wipe. Let's say I've got a glue stick down, there's filament, parts of filament stuck to it. What I'll do is I'll take off the printer. I'll rip off a piece of paper towel. I like 4 sections, so like 2 squares. And then I fold it over, put it on the print bed, and then I just cover the whole thing in a bit of isopropyl alcohol, like we talked about. It's super cheap. Just dump it on, let it sit for maybe 5 minutes, and then come back, and you can usually just rinse it off and scrub it off with your fingers. But yeah, this build plate, I've talked about it before in the course, but it's really easy to clean. Full metal build plates, I mean, there are a lot of good options out there, but this is the build plate that's worked the best for me, because it's so durable, it's so easy to clean. Another really important thing that it can't be overlooked is keeping your printer environment clean. It's not just keeping your printer clean, but everything around it. If you're in a place where it's really dusty, have some sort of system up where you can collect that dust or block it from getting to your printer. If there's no way to do that, which I promise you there is a way to do that, doesn't matter where you are, then maybe go through. It really depends on it depends how often you're gonna have to do it, on just a number of factors. But yeah, go through, give your printer a wiping once in a while. And you can even go through with a vacuum and just suck up little bits. But just make sure you don't suck up any bolts or anything. But yeah, if you want to make it so you don't have to do that as much, and just in general, this is a good idea, because it's gonna stop a lot of problems. Just keeping your printer in a clean space. If you're, like I said, if you're in a space like this garage, what you can do is you can do something as simple as just like, take a piece of cardboard or foam core, or even like garbage bags. Yeah, garbage bags. If you stretch them around your printer, or if you have them on a shelf, just put something up. It can even just be like a curtain to block some of the bigger things from getting in. That's all you need. Now, leveling the bed. There's a good chance you're gonna have to do this more often in the beginning than any other time. When I first started out, I remember I leveled the bed, I got a good print going, leveled it a couple more times, and then I just stopped for a while. Like for months, I didn't level my bed. And, I did a pretty good job the first time, but I definitely wasn't a pro. So it wasn't perfect to begin with. But after you leave it for a while, your prints are gonna start going terribly. Like, my prints suffered for a while, and I tried all sorts of things. I spent hours just like looking for the answers to my problems. And then I was like, hey, when was the last time I leveled my print bed? And I had been putting it off for a while, but all it took was 5 or 10 minutes, and next print, it was absolutely amazing. So level your print bed regularly. You don't have to do it all the time, but every 1-2 weeks maybe. If you're doing rapid prints or big prints, or you're still in the experimentation phase where you're trying a bunch of stuff that you've never done before, yeah, keep going back and checking the levelness of your printer bed. If your printer is level, it's level, but the distance is wrong, that's another place you can go wrong. So make sure you check your Z offset. You can do that again. If you're watching your first layer, you should be able to tell in general, but also just using the sticky note trick can help you a lot. I'm not going to go too in depth on how to level the bed because I've gone through that a few times before, but you can refer to previous videos, and I encourage you to if you're having problems with any of these things. Next is clean the printer. Talked a little bit about it before, but it's not just the print bed. Make sure you keep the areas around your belts and your gears. Make sure you keep those clean. Around the important electronic components. Make sure you're taking the bits of filaments. You're gonna see little tiny hairs of filament almost. They'll get stuck in your fan, so you're gonna want to have to pull those out. Sometimes using these or tweezers is gonna be very helpful for you there. But if you leave those in there for too long, they can damage the fans and stop the cooling from performing as it's supposed to. T-slot. T-slot is just this black metal that they use on tons of printers, and it's called T-slot because it has a T-shaped groove in it, and that's what allows you to attach all these things together. If you put together your printer and it looks like this, then I'm sure you notice that too. But T-slot gathers a lot of dust, a lot of debris. Little bits of filament get stuck in here all the time. So what I do is I just take this, or I take a paper towel, just bunched up like this, go through it. Sometimes you can also take the tip of the vacuum cleaner and just go through it. But, it looks nice, but also just, besides just keeping it, looking healthy, it's gonna save you from a lot of trouble. All right, next up is checking the tightness. If, your gantry's loose, if your belts are too loose or too tight, then you're gonna run into problems. Make sure that you're checking your screws and your bolts, all of these important points of contact. If it wiggles a lot, that's not a good sign. And make sure that you're checking your Z-axis rod, see how tight that is, and your manual should have the exact instructions on how to do this for your specific printer. Just the way that all these machines are built is a little bit different for each one, but just checking this, especially in the beginning, especially after you rebuild your printer, it's a good idea to check all of these things, because 3D printer sort of installation and the process of putting it all together causes way more problems than slicer settings ever did and ever will. So make sure you check those first. Now, next up is the Bowden tube. The Bowden tube is this clearish tube. The color of it kind of depends on exactly what printer you have and what model you have. But what this does is it carries the filament from the extruder down to your hot end. And, you know, some printers have a Bowden tube and some of them don't. But if yours does, you know, you can run into some issues here. The one that your printer comes with is usually not the highest quality. I've been using this one and I've run into some errors, but if you want to buy a replacement, you can get one for around $10. It's called a Capricorn tube. That's the most popular kind. You can get it on Amazon or matterhackers.com, and it's really simple to do. So when you got your printer, you should have gotten a wrench. If you don't have a wrench, get a wrench. And these bolts, it just attaches in two places, these two little screws. And you can unscrew it here and you can unscrew it here. And it's a good idea to have your filament out when you're doing this. But if you unscrew both of those, you might have to take out these tiny little blue little crescents. But once you do that, you can unscrew and, you know, pull out your Bowden tube. And then if you press down on the cap, you can usually pull it out. So some problems that you might run into with the Bowden tube. Bowden tubes, especially these ones, the ones that it comes with, are not always the most heat resistant. And depending on what you're printing with, you know, you can run into some issues there. They can come out a little bit and just basically, you know, pull up and out. And to fix that, you can just, you know, once the filament's out, squeeze down on this and push in. You might have to unscrew this in order to do all that. But make sure that this goes all the way down, or else you're going to run into issues like, you know, hot end clogs. The filament might try to push through and then just heat up and get stuck around, and then you're just going to have this giant glob that you can't get out. And really, that's the main issue you're going to run into. If for some reason, and this has happened to me, the tip of your Bowden tube gets a little bit messed up, you don't have to replace the entire thing. You can just cut the ends. Make sure that you're cutting it flat though, and you kind of round it out so there aren't any weird bits sticking out that would hold the filament in. But you can just go half an inch or so up, cut it, and then reinstall it. And that way you don't have to buy a new one every single time something goes wrong. Next, we have clean or replace your nozzles. For the longest time, I had to deal with a limited number of nozzles because I was like, you know, I got an extra, I got a spare. But you're gonna run into some issues if you keep 3D printing over a long enough time horizon. You're gonna run into some issues with nozzle clogs and things like that. So there are ways to unclog your nozzle. Way one is you can use a needle. Now your printer likely came with a needle, but you can also order these for next to nothing. And basically it's just this small needle that you shove up through your nozzle when it's heated up, and it just helps, you know, loosen up things. If something is stuck, it can get things out, but you know, this doesn't work 100% of the time. So if you can't get your nozzle unclogged, and it can be a very time consuming, very difficult, and sometimes impossible task, I would recommend just getting a bunch of nozzles. I spent like $10 and got a whole ton of nozzles. I'll leave the link down below. But if I'm having trouble with a nozzle, I'll try to fix it. But if it doesn't work, I'm not going to waste hours and hours trying to fix it. You know, you take off the silicone lining, heat it up, unscrew it, and then you can screw this new one in, and it has solved so many of my problems. I was scared to do it for a while. I don't know why, but yeah, it's going to save you a ton of time if you're willing to spend a little bit of money. Another thing that you might get is nozzle cleaning filament. This is just a small strand of filament. You really don't need a lot. And you can just push it through your extruder, and it should help get some of the stuff out of here. And you just pull it out, put the new filament in, and make sure that it keeps going until the nozzle cleaning filament is all the way out. You want it to pass through completely before starting your next print, or you're going to have a print made of your nozzle cleaning filament. So that is one thing you can try. if you're having problems and you don't want to replace your nozzle every time. Grease. Grease is definitely not required, but it is going to be helpful, especially if you're doing this over and over again and you're doing this for a long period of time. Grease, most Z-axis rods come pre-lubed. If yours came in like a black rubber case and you had to slide it out, most likely there was some type of oil or grease on that, and that just keeps, this whole section moving up and down properly. If it's not well oiled or well greased, well lubed, then it's gonna get stuck, and that's just something that you're gonna find out. But it doesn't have to be hard. You just take a little bit of grease, and you can rub it up and down, and just make sure that you move this through to totally, incorporate all of the grease, and you'll be good. Another helpful tip is you can use the foam that your 3D printer came in, assuming that you ordered it, or really any type of foam that's similar to this. Cut a strip of it, and what I like to do is I like to lift up my printer and just put it under, and make sure that all of the feet are over it so that the weight is evenly distributed and it's balanced. But this just keeps it from shaking around, because it does move fast. It'll move back and forth. There's going to be a ton of stuff going on, not to mention the print itself, the weight of the print itself. So having some type of mat down. You can also use those like floor panels, the foam floor panels. I've seen a lot of people just cut those, or EVA foam, things like that. And this is not necessary. You can also buy or print feet for your printer. But I had a bunch of foam laying around because these things come well packaged. There's a lot of parts and they're fragile. They don't want them to break. So just get a flat sheet of that, cut a rectangle, plop it down, and try it out. Okay, it's time to worry about your filament. Not all the problems you're going to run into are just to deal with your printer or your printer environment. The filament, as one may suspect, also plays a really important role. After all, it is the thing that you're using to make stuff out of. So something that I didn't really understand as a beginner is you have to make sure that when you're storing your filament, you keep it tight. If it's all loose like this and it gets tangled, when you try to print that tangled filament can almost form knots, especially because it's so stiff. But if your printer's trying to pull filament and it's stuck, it's not going to be able to pull any filament because it's going to drag this thing off, and you're going to end up most likely either breaking or stripping through the filament, and you're not going to be able to pull anymore, and most likely you're going to have a failed print. So when you're storing your filament, you can use a binder clip, or you can use the holes here on the side, or you can even 3D print your own filament clip. But what you want to do is make sure that it's tight and it's not tangled up. You want these things to be lined up. So stick it through, pull it tight, stick it through again. And then what you want to do is you want to put it in a place where it's not going to absorb a lot of moisture. Having filament that absorbs a lot of moisture, especially if you have something like PLA, it's going to really impact the quality of your prints. Now, it's not necessarily going to be a make or break thing all the time, but it's going to slowly, over time, you're going to see the effects of having the moisture in those prints. Now, as we've talked about back in our filament episode, there are ways to combat this. There are, when filament comes, it's usually in these shrink wrap bags, and it has these silica gel packets in it. That's so that it doesn't do exactly what we're talking about right now. So you can get airtight bins, and then the silica gel packets, and then not necessarily the packets, but they have beads that you can buy of the same kind of thing that's in there. You just lay them out, put your filaments in, and then when those beads absorb too much moisture, they'll actually change color. Then you can take them out and heat them back up, like in an oven or something, and then put them back in and use them again. So definitely keep these, out of, especially if you're in a really humid environment or, a garage or something. This is seriously going to impact the quality of your prints. The filament that I just used has been out for a long time, and it's definitely clear to me, how well it was working back then and how well it's working now. It's been maybe 6 months since I used this roll, but especially if you go for years without using it, gonna be some big issues. Also, even if it's not a humid environment by your standards, dust is also gonna impact it. When you have it laying out like this, or even if it's laying out sideways, dust and little bits of dirt can get in here, and it's really hard to get out. So, you can try to wipe it out, but really what ends up happening is it gets stuck in this filament. And it might look clean, it might look totally fine, but there are all these cracks because filament is just this very, very thick material. So, make sure you're keeping it at the very least in a garbage bag or something. It's just gonna keep the dust away from it. But we also have to make sure that it stays well calibrated. How do we do that? A good test print is the XYZ cube. You can find it on Thingiverse for free. And once you print it out, you want to check all of the sides. A ruler does work, but really you want to check it with something more accurate like a caliper. And when you check all of the sides, it should be a certain distance, and if it's not, then you know that your printer is doing something wrong. And based off that, you can change the Z offset, or really just, any other problems that you're having. A lot of those can be revealed in the XYZ cube. You can see the first layer, see how that's doing. It's a pretty fast print, so you get a quick feedback loop, and print out the XYZ cube, see how you're doing, see where you need to improve. Alrighty, up next is the 3D Benchy. If you followed me along through this course, then you should have already printed one of these at this point. The 3D Benchy was designed a few years ago, basically as a more complex version of the calibration cube. It has a lot of different features which allow you to measure, how your printer is doing. If you have stringing, if the hull isn't smooth, if you have holes in certain places or blobs, depending on how your certain overhangs do and how well it prints certain sections. Just based off of that information, you're going to be able to level up your prints a lot. It's just a good gauge to figure out where you are, what settings you need to change, and they actually have an entire website dedicated to learning from printing your 3D Benchy. So, we talked about it more back when we printed it out, but you can download it for free on Thingiverse, and then they have a PDF, which I'll link below, and the website. Prints super fast, where it just talks about the different ways to see what's wrong. The details if you're going to print your own. The scale should be 1:1. Don't modify it. The 3D Bencher measures 60 millimeters from bow to stern. All of the measurements on here are relatively simple, so that way, once you print them out, you can look up and just measure, just like the calibration cube, see if it's printing accurately. A lot of printers, if they've been sitting for a while, or just user error in general, no matter how experienced they are, your dimensions can be way off for your 3D prints. So, go back through, see how you're doing. Just print out the 3D Benchy. It's got millions of prints. It's the most downloaded and printed file for 3D printers in the world ever. So, give it a try. So, like we said, print it. Scale 1:1. The layer height is 0.2 millimeters, which is pretty standard. Infill of 10%. The print speed up to 50 millimeters per second. The travel speed for when it's not actually printing up to about 150 millimeters per second. And then the print nozzle diameter, again, really standard, is 0.4 millimeters. You can see all of this stuff down with the link below, 3benji.com. And yeah, this is just gonna help you with a lot of different issues. The hole should be smooth. If you see any weird little blobs, stringing, asymmetry, just trouble at all, we're gonna handle this a little bit more down in the next episode, troubleshooting. So now you know the basics of how to maintain your 3D printer over the long haul. We're not doing this just to get your first print in, just for this one experiment. You know, it's good to try new things and experiment, but we have to make sure that we're taking care of this guy, or else he's gonna go out. He's gonna die. So thank you for watching. I'm Caleb, and until next time, this is 3D Printing 101.